Everyone thought she was gone, but one dog refused to believe it, and he was right. A little girl's heartbeat was fading until a dog did the unthinkable. The late March sky loomed above Greenhaven Cemetery like a heavy grey shroud, mirroring the sorrowful expressions of the crowd gathered around the small white coffin. The funeral of 6-year-old Lila Taylor had brought nearly every soul in Riverest to a standstill, the collective grief thick in the cool spring air. Jackson stood motionless beside his daughter's casket, a hollow figure who barely resembled the man he'd been just days ago. As the ceremony drew to a close, a sudden disturbance rippled through the crowd. A large German shepherd, wild-eyed and fierce, barreled through the parted mourners, disregarding the desperate commands of his uniformed handler. The police canine, Sutton, dashed toward the coffin with unrelenting purpose, sending a wave of gasps across the gathered crowd. In a seamless, calculated leap, Sutton positioned himself directly on top of the small white casket, his body quivering with a strange mix of anxiety and determination. "Get that dog away from her!" a voice cried out, panic rising. The handler, visibly embarrassed, moved toward the dog with leash in hand. But as he attempted to pull Sutton away, the dog snarled, revealing a set of teeth, a response the handler had never witnessed before. At the edge of the mourners, a lone figure stood, cloaked in leather, his face partially hidden by a greying beard and dark sunglasses. Archie observed the dog's actions, his sharp, military-trained eyes narrowing with suspicion. Something was wrong. The dog wasn't just mourning, he was signaling, and Archie knew exactly what that meant. But beneath her bright smile and lively spirit, Lila fought a daily battle. Since she was 3, when the same car accident that took her mother's life left her with a traumatic brain injury, Lila had struggled with epilepsy. The seizures came without warning, stealing precious moments of her childhood every time they struck. Yet in spite of it all, she held on to a fierce optimism, especially when it came to animals. "Animals don't look at you funny when you fall down," she once said to her father. "They just wait for you to get back up." Before tragedy shattered his world, Jackson had been a well-respected veterinarian. Now, at 42, his prematurely greying hair and the deep lines etched into his face told the story of a man who had aged years in mere months. After the death of his wife, Jennifer, Jackson had closed his practice, unable to bear the constant reminders of the life they'd built together. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to Lila's care, working from home as a medical transcriptionist in between hospital visits and doctor's appointments. The mounting medical bills were a constant weight, along with the nagging fear that one day a seizure might take Lila too. His hands, once steady enough for delicate surgeries, now trembled as he helped his daughter with her medication. "One day at a time," he whispered to himself every morning, his wife's favourite saying now, his only lifeline. Sutton had come into their lives broken, an injured German shepherd puppy found with shattered ribs and cigarette burns, signs of unspeakable cruelty. And then there was Archie, a man whose rugged exterior hid a complex soul. His weathered leather jacket, adorned with motorcycle club patches, and the faded military tattoos on his arms made him seem every bit the intimidating figure. But few in Riverest knew that this gruff biker was actually Jennifer Taylor's estranged brother, a former army combat medic whose descent into self-destruction after his service had cost him his family ties. Even fewer knew about the incident that had landed him in prison, assaulting Dr. Colton Peterson after the doctor had refused to treat a child from the wrong side of town. The day everything changed. The dawn was clear and crisp, exactly 3 years after Jennifer Taylor's death. Jackson had dreaded the anniversary for weeks, watching Lila grow quieter as the date drew near. Their ritual was simple but sacred. They would visit Jennifer's favorite hiking trail in the Appalachian foothills, where wildflowers bloomed in shades of purple and yellow, her favorite colors. This year, Lila insisted on bringing a small bouquet of hand-picked dandelions. "Because they're strong enough to grow anywhere, just like Mommy said I am." They parked at the familiar trailhead, Jackson checking Lila's medical bag for the umpteenth time, extra medication, emergency contact information, and the special cushion helmet in case of a fall. The path wound gently upward through oak and hickory trees, their leaves just beginning to unfurl, with the promise of spring. Lila skipped ahead, never too far from Jackson's watchful eye. They reached the lookout point where Jennifer had once loved to capture the sunsets with her camera, and Jackson helped Lila arrange her dandelions into a small cairn of stones. "Daddy, did you hear that?" Lila asked suddenly, her head tilting to one side. Jackson shook his head, hearing only the rustle of leaves and the distant songs of birds. But Lila was already moving, drawn towards something only she seemed to sense. Anxious, Jackson called for her to slow down. When he caught up, he found Lila kneeling beside a fallen log, speaking in the soft, comforting tone she used for frightened animals. "It's okay," she was whispering. "We won't hurt you." At first, Jackson saw nothing. But then a slight movement caught his eye, revealing the source of Lila's concern. A German shepherd puppy, no more than 3 months old, trapped beneath the rotting wood. Its fur was matted with mud and blood. One of its hind legs twisted at an unnatural angle. What unsettled Jackson the most were the circular burns, raw and deliberate, where fur had been seared away from skin. Cruel coltons that twisted his stomach with their cruelty. "Daddy, he's hurt bad," Lila said, her voice trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. "Like I was after the accident. We have to help him." Jackson's veterinary instincts kicked in. He knelt beside the puppy, assessing its condition. Severely dehydrated, multiple injuries, but miraculously still alive. Using his jacket, he fashioned a makeshift carrier, gently wrapping the trembling animal in its folds. The puppy didn't resist or growl. Instead, it locked eyes with Lila, its gaze full of recognition, as if it knew they were there to help. "He knows we're helping him," Lila said with unshakable certainty. "I'm going to name him Sutton. It means friend in Native American." "Actually, sweetheart, it's a bit more complicated than that," Jackson began, but then stopped himself, looking down at the puppy. "Sutton is perfect. The nearest animal hospital was closed for renovations, so Jackson drove instead to Blue Ridge Animal Sanctuary. He had donated his veterinary equipment there after closing his practice and knew the director, Dr. Sarah Williams, would offer help without hesitation. Nestled against the foothills, the sanctuary's sprawling grounds housed everything from abandoned farm animals to injured wildlife. Sarah met them at the entrance, her experienced eyes quickly taking in the situation. "Bring him straight back," she instructed, leading them through the main building to an examination room that Jackson recognized. It was equipped with many of his former instruments: multiple fractures, dehydration, malnourishment, and these burns. Sarah's voice grew colder as she gently examined Sutton. "This wasn't an accident. Someone did this deliberately. We'll need to report it." While Sarah prepared for x-rays, Lila sat beside the table, speaking quietly to the puppy. Despite Jackson's concerns about cleanliness and possible aggression, Sutton's eyes never left Lila. And when Sarah tried to move him for the procedure, the puppy whimpered, reluctant to be separated from the little girl. "I've never seen anything quite like this bond," Sarah commented, shaking her head in surprise, especially with a dog that's been through so much. "Usually they don't trust humans at all after something like this." The road to rehabilitation would be long. Sutton would need surgery for his broken leg, antibiotics to fight infection, and specialized care for his burns. When Sarah gently suggested they consider leaving the puppy at the sanctuary for full-time care, Lila's response was immediate and unyielding. "He needs me," she said, her small hands balling into determined fists. "And I need him too." Jackson saw it instantly. Lila's face mirrored Jennifer's at her most resolute. It was the same expression that signaled a decision could not be changed. He agreed to cover Sutton's medical expenses in installments and committed to bringing Lila for daily visits while the puppy healed. Those visits quickly became the highlight of Lila's days. She would sit, reading books aloud to Sutton as he recovered, sneaking in treats despite the strict dietary regimen. Jackson watched, astounded, as Lila's seizure frequency slowly diminished during these visits. It started with a single day without an episode, then 3, and eventually a full week. Her neurologist was cautiously optimistic, noting that emotional support animals often provided measurable improvements in patients with neurological conditions. What truly astonished both Jackson and the sanctuary staff began to unfold in the 3rd week of their visits. Lila had been sitting beside Sutton's kennel when her body suddenly stiffened, the unmistakable sign of an impending seizure. Before Jackson could react, Sutton was already on the move. Despite his healing leg, the puppy pressed himself against the kennel door until it swung open, then positioned himself next to Lila, barking urgently until Jackson arrived. The seizure that followed was less severe than usual, and Lila recovered more quickly than she had in the past. "That dog knew before any of us," Sarah recoltoned later, reviewing the sanctuary's security footage. "Look at the timestamp. He started acting differently almost 2 minutes before her clinical symptoms appeared." Further observation confirmed it wasn't a coincidence. Sutton consistently displayed alerting behaviors before Lila's seizures, restlessness, specific vocalizations, and physical positioning that allowed Lila to lie down safely before the episode hit. Without any formal training, Sutton had become something invaluable, an early warning system that gave Lila those precious moments to prepare. "There are specialized programs for epilepsy service dogs," Sarah told Jackson one evening, "but they cost upwards of $20,000 with waiting lists that can stretch for years. What you've found here is extraordinary." As Sutton healed physically, his bond with Lila deepened into something far beyond typical human-animal relationships. The abused puppy, who should have feared people, had instead developed a recoltonable sensitivity to Lila's medical needs. For her part, Lila thrived in her new role as Sutton's protector, her confidence growing as she helped with his physical therapy. "He was broken, and now he's getting better," she said to Jackson, her voice serious. "Just like me." Jackson watched them together, sensing something he couldn't quite put into words, a connection that felt destined, not accidental. When Sutton was finally cleared for adoption, the decision had already been made. The German Shepherd puppy who had survived deliberate cruelty would go home with the little girl who had endured devastating loss. Neither of them was whole, but together they had found something that felt complete. 6 months after Sutton had become part of the Taylor family, a call came from the Rivercrest Police Department. Chief Michael Wilson explained that their K9 unit had been observing Sutton during Lila's therapy sessions at a rehabilitation center where the department volunteered. Sutton's natural alerting abilities, intelligence, and temperament had impressed the K9 trainer so much that they wanted to discuss a proposition with Jackson. "We're not trying to take him away from your daughter," Chief Wilson clarified as they sat in the Taylor's modest living room. Sutton lay protectively at Lila's feet, his eyes following the unfamiliar visitor. "What we're proposing is a partnership program. Sutton would undergo professional training to enhance his natural abilities, and he would work part-time with our department. The rest of the time, he would remain Lila's companion." Jackson exchanged a glance with Lila, who was absently running her fingers through Sutton's fur. I don't understand. He's a rescue with a traumatic history. Don't you usually start with purpose-bred puppies?" Officer James Lowry, the department's K9 trainer, nodded respectfully. "Typically, yes, but Sutton has demonstrated exceptional qualities. His ability to alert to Lila's seizures without formal training indicates an extraordinary sensitivity. We believe he could excel in detection work, particularly in finding missing persons or medical alert scenarios. The financial aspects of the proposal were hard to ignore. The department would cover all of Sutton's veterinary expenses, provide professional training worth thousands of dollars, and pay a monthly stipend that would help offset Lila's medical bills. In return, Sutton would work 20 hours a week with the K9 unit after completing his training. "What about his time with Lila?" Jackson asked, his protective instincts flaring. "Her seizures can happen at any time." "We've thought about that," Chief Wilson replied. "We've arranged with Dr. Williams at the sanctuary to develop a specialized training schedule that accommodates Lila's school hours and medical appointments. Sutton would primarily work while Lila is in school, and we'd ensure he's available during her highest risk periods." Lila, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Would Sutton get a police badge and one of those special vests?" Officer Lowry smiled, crouching down to her level. "He would indeed. He'd be an official police K9 with his own badge number, and you could attend his graduation ceremony when he completes his training." The idea lit up Lila's face momentarily, but then doubt clouded her expression. "But what if I have a big seizure and he's working? What if I need him and he's not there?" It was the question Jackson had been dreading. For months, Sutton had been Lila's guardian, alerting before seizures struck, positioning himself to cushion her falls, and staying by her side during each episode. The thought of Sutton being absent during a critical moment sent a chill through Jackson's heart. Despite his concerns, Jackson recognized the opportunity this represented. Lila's medical expenses had been mounting steadily, and the specialized pediatric neurologist in the neighboring county, who was their best hope for improved seizure management, didn't accept their insurance. The financial support from the canine program could make that specialized care a reality. After extensive discussion and careful consideration, they agreed to a trial period. Sutton began training with Officer Lowry 3 mornings a week while Lila was at school. The shepherd proved to be an exceptional student, mastering commands and scenarios that usually took other dogs months to grasp. The trainers were amazed by his ability to shift seamlessly between professional alertness during training sessions and the gentle attentiveness he displayed when reunited with Lila. "He understands the difference between his jobs," Officer Lowry said, watching Sutton transition from a focused police dog to a therapeutic companion the moment Lila appeared. "It's like he has 2 distinct sides to his personality, each perfectly suited to its purpose." As Sutton progressed through his training, Lila's condition took a worrying turn. The seizures that had become less frequent after Sutton's arrival began to intensify once again. The episodes grew longer, more severe, and increasingly resistant to the medications that had once helped. Jackson found himself making weekly trips to the emergency room, holding Lila's small hand, while doctors administered rescue medications to stop seizures that wouldn't subside on their own. "We need to adjust her treatment plan," Dr. Henderson, Lila's longtime neurologist, said during yet another follow-up appointment. "The EEG is showing increased activity in the temporal lobe. I'd like to refer her to Dr. Eliza Montgomery at Children's Memorial. She specializes in complex pediatric epilepsy cases." Jackson's heart sank as he read through the referral paperwork. Children's Memorial was a 3-hour drive away, and Dr. Montgomery, as he had feared, was out of network for their insurance. The initial consultation alone would cost more than a month's salary. "Is there any other option?" Jackson asked, his voice betraying his desperation. Dr. Henderson's expression softened, her sympathy palpable. "For routine epilepsy management, yes, but Lila's case is becoming increasingly complex. Dr. Montgomery pioneered a diagnostic protocol specifically for cases like hers, where standard treatments aren't providing adequate seizure control. I wouldn't suggest this if I didn't believe it was absolutely necessary." That night, after Lila had finally fallen asleep with Sutton vigilantly watching over her, Jackson sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, insurance statements, and denial letters. The house he and Jennifer had once purchased with such hope now felt like it was collapsing around him. The roof needed repairs, the heating system was on the fritz, and now Lila needed specialized medical care they couldn't afford. The canine program stipend helped, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover the mounting costs. In desperation, Jackson called Sarah Williams at the sanctuary, hoping to discuss increasing Sutton's training hours for additional compensation. Sarah listened sympathetically, then made a suggestion that took Jackson by surprise. "The canine graduation ceremony is next month, and it's a big community event," she said. "Local businesses donate generously to the program. With your permission, I could speak to Chief Wilson about highlighting Lila and Sutton's story. A fundraiser tied to the ceremony might generate enough support for Lila's treatment." The thought of publicly exposing his daughter's medical struggles made Jackson uneasy. Jennifer had always been fiercely protective of Lila's privacy. But faced with the alternative, denying her the potentially life-saving medical care she needed, he reluctantly agreed. The weeks leading up to Sutton's canine graduation ceremony were a blur of preparations. Local news outlets picked up the story of the abused rescue dog who had become both a devoted service animal to a child with epilepsy and a promising police canine. Lila was even interviewed for the school newspaper, proudly explaining how Sutton could sense her seizures before they happened. Officer Lowry had arranged for Lila to present Sutton with his official canine vest during the ceremony, an honor that had her practicing her lines every evening before bed. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. The police department's training field had been transformed with rows of folding chairs, a podium draped in the American flag, and a display table showcasing photographs of the graduating canine teams. Lila wore her favorite blue dress with delicate butterflies embroidered along the hem, her hair carefully braided by Mrs. Chan from next door. Sutton had been professionally groomed, his coat gleaming in the morning sunlight as Officer Lowry put him through final practice runs. The ceremony began with the chief's welcome address, followed by a demonstration of each graduating dog's specialized skills. When it was Sutton's turn, he performed flawlessly, locating hidden training items and responding to Officer Lowry's commands with a precision that drew appreciative applause from the audience. Jackson sat in the front row beside Lila, his chest tight with conflicting emotions, pride in Sutton's achievements, and a gnawing anxiety about the fundraising appeal that would follow. As Sutton's demonstration concluded, Officer Lowry called Lila to the presentation area. She walked forward carefully, carrying the specially sized canine vest with Sutton embroidered beside the police insignia. The audience fell silent as the little girl solemnly presented the vest to Officer Lowry, who helped her place it on Sutton. The shepherd stood perfectly still, his posture conveying dignity despite the flashing cameras and murmurs of the crowd. And now, Officer Lowry announced, Sutton would like to demonstrate his most important skill, the one that inspired our department to welcome him into our canine program. This was the moment they had planned. Sutton would perform a seizure alert demonstration with a training volunteer, showcasing the ability that made him exceptional. But as Lila turned to walk back to her seat, Sutton suddenly stiffened, his attention locking onto her with an intensity Jackson recognized immediately. "Lila!" Jackson called out, already rising from his chair. But it was too late. In front of hundreds of witnesses, Lila's body went rigid, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed onto the grassy field. Sutton broke formation before anyone could react, positioning himself beneath Lila's falling body and barking the specific alert he had developed for her most severe seizures. The demonstration had become horrifyingly real. What followed was a blur of activity, Officer Lowry radioing for the paramedic station nearby as a precaution, Jackson administering Lila's emergency medication, with shaking hands, and Sutton refusing to leave her side even as medical personnel arrived. The seizure didn't respond to the initial rescue medication, continuing with an intensity that left Lila's lips tinged blue. "We need to transport now," the lead paramedic decided efficiently as Lila was carefully transferred to a stretcher. "River Rest General is 7 minutes out." As they loaded Lila into the ambulance, Sutton tried to follow, straining against Officer Lowry's grip. The shepherd's distress was palpable, his alert barks continuing even as the ambulance doors slammed shut. In that moment, Jackson made a split-second decision. "Let him come," he told Officer Lowry, already climbing into the ambulance. "She needs him." The ceremonial K9 vest was hastily removed as Sutton leaped inside, immediately positioning himself as close to Lila as the paramedics would allow. Throughout the frantic ride to River Rest General, as Lila's seizure passed the 15-minute Colton into status epilepticus, Sutton remained vigilant. Occasionally, he made eye contact with Jackson, as if trying to communicate a shared concern. At the hospital, the emergency department was already on alert. Dr. Colton Peterson, the attending physician, barely acknowledged Sutton as Lila was wheeled into a treatment room. "No dogs in the ED," he said firmly, pointing toward the waiting area. "Hospital policy," Jackson began to protest, but a nurse quickly interjected. "He's her seizure alert dog, Doctor. Peterson, we've been instructed to make accommodations for service animals." With visible reluctance, Peterson allowed Sutton to remain, though he insisted the dog stay on the far side of the treatment room. The team worked urgently to stabilize Lila, whose seizure had finally begun to subside with stronger medication. Jackson found himself watching Sutton more than the monitors. The shepherd's behavior had shifted from alert to watchful. His eyes never left Lila's face. What none of them realized at that moment was that this seizure Colton the beginning of the most difficult chapter in their journey, one that would test the limits of medicine, reveal unexpected connections, and ultimately demonstrate the extraordinary bond between a broken girl and the dog who refused to let her go. The fluorescent lights of River Rest General Hospital's emergency department cast harsh shadows across Lila's pale face. Dr. Colton Peterson moved with clinical precision, barking out orders for medications and diagnostic tests without sparing a glance at Jackson. 6 hours after admission, the seizure activity had finally ceased, but Lila remained unconscious, her small body tethered to a maze of monitors. "We've administered 3 rounds of anti-seizure medication," Peterson explained. eyes still on the chart. The seizure has stopped, but she's not regaining consciousness as we'd expect. We'll need to run an EEG to assess brain activity and check for possible damage from prolonged seizure activity. Jackson stood silently at her bedside, one hand near hers, the other absently stroking Sutton's head. The shepherd had maintained his quiet, watchful presence throughout the emergency, his behavior impeccable. "This isn't her first serious seizure," Jackson said, his voice low. "Her recovery time varies, but she usually starts responding within a few hours." Dr. Peterson didn't even look up. "Mr. Taylor, status epilepticus seizures lasting over 30 minutes can cause significant neurological damage. Your daughter seized for nearly 45 minutes. We need to prepare for the possibility that this episode was qualitatively different from her previous ones." The bluntness hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. He looked down at Sutton, drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. "Doctor, Henderson has been managing her epilepsy since she was 3, Jackson said, his voice tight. "I'd like him consulted." "He's out of town at a conference," Peterson replied, dismissing Jackson's request with a wave. "I've reviewed her records. I'm fully capable of managing her care. Now I need to check on other patients. A nurse will take her for the EEG shortly." As Peterson left, Jackson noticed Sutton's posture shift. The shepherd was no longer just watchful. He was alert, his gaze locked on the doctor's movements with the same focused intensity he displayed during canine training. The hours blurred together, diagnostic tests, hushed hallway consultations, the constant beep of monitors. Sutton remained at Lila's side, thanks to his official status and the kindness of a nurse who brought him water and a blanket. Just after midnight, Jackson dozed fitfully in the visitor's chair. A soft whine jolted him awake. Sutton had risen, his eyes locked onto Lila. Jackson glanced at the monitors. No change, but Lila's face had taken on a subtle grey pallor. "Nurse," he called, pressing the call button. "Something's wrong." The night nurse arrived, assessing her vitals before paging the on-call physician. The room flooded with personnel. Alarms blared as Lila's oxygen levels plummeted. "Respiratory arrest," someone shouted. "Initiate resuscitation protocol." Jackson was forced back against the wall, Sutton at his side, as doctors inserted a breathing tube and attached Lila to a ventilator. A new doctor, the overnight attending, examined her unresponsive eyes and tested her reflexes. "Page Doctor Peterson," the doctor instructed. "He's following this case." Peterson arrived 20 agonizing minutes later, looking freshly dressed. He reviewed the new data with the attending before turning to Jackson. "Mr. Taylor, your daughter's condition has deteriorated significantly. The EEG shows minimal brain activity, and she now requires ventilator support. This, combined with a lack of response to stimuli, indicates severe neurological compromise." "What are you saying?" Jackson asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The prolonged seizure appears to have caused catastrophic brain damage. We'll continue supportive care, but you should prepare for the possibility that she won't recover meaningful neurological function." Jackson stared at him, unable to comprehend the words. "She's 6, he whispered, the desperation in his voice undeniable. "You can't just tell me to give up." "I'm not suggesting that," Peterson replied, impatience creeping into his tone. "I'm giving you a medical assessment based on 30 years of experience. Medicine has its limits." Sutton had begun pacing, softly whining, a pattern Jackson recognized as a seizure alert. "I want a second opinion," Jackson said, his voice hardening. "And I transferred to Children's Memorial to Dr. Montgomery. She specializes in complex pediatric epilepsy." Peterson's tone grew icy. "That's not reasonable. First, she's not stable enough for transfer. Second, their services would be wasted on a case with such a poor prognosis. Third, your insurance won't cover it." "I don't care about insurance," Jackson snapped, his voice raw with frustration. "We'll figure that out. Lila deserves every chance." "Even if I approved the transfer, which I won't, their ethics board would likely decline the case. It would deprive other children of care." Jackson's grief morphed into a white-hot fury. "You don't know my daughter," he growled. "She's fought through everything since the accident. You don't get to just write her off." Peterson glanced at his watch, clearly uninterested in Jackson's words. "I'll order another EEG in the morning, but don't expect different results. Try to get some rest." As Peterson left, Jackson collapsed back into the chair, utterly shattered. His mind raced with all the things left unsaid, but the crushing weight of helplessness left him speechless. Sutton padded over and gently rested his head on Jackson's knee, offering the only comfort he could. Jackson gripped Lila's small hand with one of his, Sutton's fur with the other, and allowed himself to break down. The tears came like a flood, raw and uncontrollable. By morning, Lila's condition had not changed. The second EEG confirmed the same grim reality, minimal brain activity. Doctors spoke to Jackson with cautious sympathy, their words laced with an undertone of finality that made his stomach churn. Around noon, Officer Lowry appeared with fresh clothes and food for Sutton. After hearing Jackson's account of Peterson's refusal to consider any alternatives, Lowry's face darkened. Peterson, tall guy, silver hair, always looks like he's smelling something bad. Jackson nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. Yeah, that's him. 5 years ago, he turned away a kid from the trailer park, insurance issue. The kid ended up with permanent complications. Archie, the biker who runs the veterans program, assaulted Peterson in the parking lot, got 18 months. The story lingered uncomfortably in Jackson's mind. Before he could process it further, the door opened again. A young neurologist stepped in. I'm Dr. Amara Singh. I've been asked by hospital administration to consult on Lila's case. She went over the test results thoroughly, conducting a careful neurological exam and noting reflexes Peterson hadn't bothered to check. Throughout it all, Sutton remained calm, his behavior in stark contrast to the anxious energy he'd shown during Peterson's visits. Mr. Taylor, Dr. Singh, finally said, her voice steady but kind, I'd like to order a more comprehensive EEG using provocation protocols and specific autonomic response measurements. Dr. Peterson focused on cortical activity, but there are deeper brain functions we must assess before drawing conclusions. For the first time in over 24 hours, Jackson allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Would Dr. Peterson approve the tests? The neurologist had seemed so certain that further intervention would be futile. Dr. Singh maintained a professional demeanor, but there was a subtle softness in her eyes. As the consulting neurologist, I can order these tests independently, she explained gently. I've already discussed it with the chief of medicine. The additional tests took most of the afternoon. Jackson never left Lila's side, finding strength in Sutton's quiet vigilance and the unwavering presence of Officer Lowry. As evening descended, Dr. Singh returned, her face grave, but not entirely devoid of hope. The tests show something interesting, she said, displaying the results on her tablet. There's minimal typical cortical activity, what Dr. Peterson focused on, but we're seeing preservation of autonomic functions and some subcortical responses. This suggests that the damage may not be as catastrophic as initially believed. It could be a profound postictal state rather than irreversible damage. What does that mean for Lila? Jackson asked, clinging to her words as if they were a lifeline. It means we shouldn't rush to pessimistic conclusions, Dr. Singh replied carefully. I recommend continuing supportive care and, if she stabilizes, considering a transfer to a pediatric neurological center for more specialized evaluation. Dr. Montgomery at Children's Memorial would be ideal. She specializes in complex epilepsy syndromes. A spark of hope flickered in Jackson's chest, only to be immediately stifled by the cold reality of his situation. Doctor? Peterson said she's not stable enough for transfer, Jackson said, his voice tight with the frustration of 1,000 unspoken words. And insurance won't cover treatment at Children's Memorial. Dr. Singh chose her next words carefully, her tone gentle but firm. Medically, I believe she can be transported safely with the proper support. As for insurance, that's outside my purview. But the hospital social worker might be able to assist. Their conversation was abruptly cut short as Dr. Peterson entered, his expression darkening upon finding Dr. Singh there. I wasn't informed about these additional tests, he said curtly, his eyes scanning the tablet with barely concealed irritation. The chief of medicine approved the consult, Dr. Singh replied evenly. Given the complexity of the case, a second neurological opinion was deemed necessary. Peterson dismissed her findings with a cold nod. Interesting academic observations, but they don't change the fundamental prognosis. Mr. Taylor, I've discussed your daughter's case with the ethics committee. Given her condition and the poor prospects for recovery, we're recommending a transition to comfort care only. The words, Comfort Care Only hit Jackson like a punch to the chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. "Absolutely not," Jackson said, his voice cracking with a mix of disbelief and rising fury. "Dr. Singh just said there's reason to believe the damage might not be permanent." "Dr. Singh is offering false hope based on outlier readings," Peterson countered, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've been practicing medicine since before she entered medical school. Continuing aggressive intervention only prolongs the inevitable and causes suffering." Before Jackson could respond, a sudden, horrifying cacophony of alarms shattered the moment. Lila's heart rate plummeted, the ventilator screamed, and panic flooded the room. "She's crashing!" Dr. Singh shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos, already administering chest compressions as the crash cart was rushed in. The next 45 minutes unfolded in a blur of frantic motion. Jackson stood frozen against the wall, his knuckles white as he gripped Sutton's collar, the dog's presence grounding him as the medical team fought to revive Lila. Finally, the room fell into a grim silence. The team exchanged looks of exhaustion and helplessness. Dr. Peterson, his voice sterile and cold, turned to Jackson. "Time of death? 7:42 p.m., he said, the words striking Jackson like an unrelenting wave. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Taylor. We did everything we could, but her injuries were too severe." Jackson couldn't process it. The words, the finality, felt like an impossible weight pressing down on him. Dr. Singh quietly checked Lila's pupils one last time before nodding, confirming what they all feared. Sutton, who had been perfectly still throughout the crisis, suddenly let out a low, mournful whine, something different from his usual alert bark. It was a sound filled with grief, raw and heartbreaking, that shattered something deep inside Jackson. "Would you like some time with her?" a nurse asked gently, her voice a soft balm to the chaos. "We can remove the breathing tube and make her comfortable for you to say goodbye." Jackson nodded numbly, barely able to comprehend the weight of her words. They transformed Lila from the vibrant child she had been into a still, lifeless form beneath crisp hospital blankets. When they stepped back, Jackson approached her bedside, Sutton following silently behind. He took her hand, still warm but chillingly lifeless, and in that moment, an unbearable certainty settled over him. The unthinkable had happened. Despite every promise he had made since Jennifer's death, Lila was gone. 3 days later, the town of Rivercrest gathered at Greenhaven Cemetery to say goodbye. The March morning was overcast, the muted sunlight filtering through clouds as grey as the mood of the mourners. Greenhaven sat on a gentle hillside above the town, its manicured grounds dotted with ancient oaks that had witnessed generations of grief. Jackson stood beside his daughter's white coffin, his face gaunt, barely recognizing the hollow reflection in its polished surface. The past 72 hours had passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and funeral arrangements, each task performed with mechanical precision, as if he were moving through water, too numb to feel. The funeral home director had been kind but clinical, guiding Jackson through impossible decisions. The smallest casket they offered, a burial plot beside Jennifer's, the wording of an obituary that tried but failed to capture the light Lila had brought to the world. Pastor Williams, his weathered Bible open in his hands, stepped to the podium. The elderly minister had baptized Lila as an infant and had presided over Jennifer's funeral 3 years earlier. He surveyed the nearly 200 mourners, many holding small stuffed animals or bright pinwheels, symbols of Lila's love for the whimsical and the joyful. "We come together today," he began, his voice steady but laden with sorrow, bearing a burden too heavy to carry alone. Lila Elizabeth Taylor brightened this community for 6 short years with her courage, her kindness, and her extraordinary spirit. As he spoke, Jackson stood, motionless, his eyes locked on the tiny white coffin adorned with a spray of wildflowers, flowers they had gathered from the trail where they'd found Sutton. The dog was not permitted at the service. The funeral director had gently but firmly explained the policy against animals at graveside ceremonies. Sutton remained at the police K-9 unit under Officer Lowe's care, reportedly refusing food since Lila's death. Pastor Williams concluded with a quiet announcement. Lila's father would like to share a few words. Jackson stepped forward like a man walking through water, his legs heavy as if carrying an unspoken burden. He unfolded the paper he had prepared. but then let it fall, unused. My daughter, he began, voice trembling, loved to collect stones. Not valuable ones, just little pebbles that caught her eye. Her room is filled with jars of them, rocks most of us would never notice. He paused, inhaling deeply, trying to steady the tightness that had gripped his chest. After her mother died, Lila told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Daddy, people are like my rocks. They all have something special, but sometimes you have to look really hard to see it." There was a moment of silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She was 6 and already understood what many people never do. That value isn't always obvious and everyone deserves a second look. The sound of quiet weeping rippled through the crowd, but Jackson pressed on, the words coming from a place deep within. She saw that something special in Sutton when he was broken and abandoned. She saw it in classmates others overlooked, and she saw it in me, even when grief had made me a shadow of the father she deserved. His voice cracked, but he continued, steeling himself against the heartbreak. Lila fought from the day she was born. Her epilepsy never defined her. It was just part of her story, not the whole book. She met every challenge with a courage that humbled me. The air felt thick, as if the world itself mourned with him. The world is dimmer without her light, but I know she'd want us to keep looking for that special something in others, to keep collecting those little treasures most people ignore. As he returned to the coffin, Mrs. Chin, Lila's favorite neighbor who had taught her to fold origami cranes, began singing Amazing Grace. Her soprano voice rang clear, carrying across the hillside. Others joined in, the melody rising and falling with the breeze, stirring the old oak trees, creating a hauntingly beautiful atmosphere. Near the back, hidden partially behind a large memorial stone, stood a solitary figure. Archie had arrived as the service began, maintaining a respectful distance. His leather jacket was zipped against the cold. Sunglasses hid his eyes, but not the tension in his shoulders. Few mourners noticed him. Fewer still recognized him as Jennifer's estranged brother, Lila's uncle. As the hymn ended, Pastor Williams invited mourners to place tributes, stuffed animals, pinwheels, drawings, into a basket that would go home with the family. The solemn procession had just begun when a sudden commotion at the cemetery gates. The ceremony had barely settled into a mournful quiet when Officer James Lowry came hurrying up the gravel path, his demeanor visibly distressed. Following closely behind, straining against a police-issue leash, was Sutton. The German shepherd's focused intensity was palpable, even from a distance. This wasn't the behavior of a dog who had broken training. This was a dog responding to something beyond human understanding. "I'm so sorry," Lowry whispered urgently to Jackson as he approached. "He broke through 2 secured doors at the facility. When I tried to contain him, Lowry gestured to his torn sleeve and a defensive wound on his forearm. "He's never shown aggression before. I thought maybe he should be here to say goodbye." Jackson nodded mutely, too emotionally drained to object. The funeral director, seeing the commotion, approached with a concerned expression, ready to enforce the no animals policy, but something in Jackson's grief-stricken gaze stopped him. "Just for a moment," Jackson said quietly, his voice worn with sorrow. He was her protector. He deserves to say goodbye too. After a long pause, reluctant permission was granted. Lowry loosened Sutton's leash, and the shepherd paused only briefly before scanning the gathered mourners. Then his gaze locked onto Lila's small white coffin. With purposeful steps he moved forward, mourners instinctively parting to allow him passage. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Rather than sniffing the casket or lying beside it, as Lowry had anticipated, Sutton hoisted his front paws onto the coffin's edge. With a graceful but determined motion, he pulled himself fully atop it, settling into a poised, sphinx-like position. His intelligent eyes scanned the stunned faces before finally resting on Jackson, an unspoken message conveyed. Between them, the funeral director began to move forward with visible discomfort. "Sir, I'm afraid we can't—" "Wait." Jackson's voice cut through the tension, his full attention fixed on Sutton. Something about the dog's posture wasn't right. This wasn't grief, no mournful whining or restless circling like at the hospital. Sutton's body was alert, ears forward, muscles tense, the same vigilant stance he used when monitoring Lila for seizures. From the back of the crowd, Archie lowered his sunglasses, eyes narrowing as he watched the dog's uncharacteristic behavior. 20 years as a combat medic had sharpened his instincts, making him more attuned to subtle patterns than most. Something about Sutton's stance ignited a memory he couldn't yet place. "He's not grieving," Jake murmured under his breath, drawing a curious glance from a nearby mourner. "That's an alert posture." The funeral director, still visibly unsettled, gestured urgently to Officer Lowry. "Mr. Taylor, please, this is highly irregular. We need to continue with the service." But Jackson barely heard him, his entire focus locked on Sutton, who had begun to emit a soft, rhythmic whine. Not mournful, not aimless. The alert pattern. "He's alerting," Jackson whispered, a terrible, impossible hope rising in his chest like a storm swell. Why would he alert if... His thought was cut off by a sharp bark, the one Sutton used only during Lila's most severe seizures, the one that meant now. The sound cracked across the hillside like a gunshot, sending a flock of mourning doves fluttering from a nearby oak. "Get that animal under control," the funeral director barked, his professional veneer fracturing. "This is completely inappropriate." Lowry moved forward to retrieve the dog, but Sutton growled low, warning him off. This wasn't a tantrum, this was instinct, purpose, something deeper than training. "Something's wrong," Lowry whispered to Jackson, visibly rattled. "I've never seen him like this, not even in protection drills." At the back of the gathering, Jake's instincts finally crystallized. His eyes narrowed. Then he pushed forward through the mourners. "The dog's alerting," he called to Jackson. "Someone needs to check." "Sir, please return to your seat," the funeral director snapped, motioning for staff to intervene. "We're in the middle of—" Jake didn't stop. He reached Jackson, and up close, the resemblance to Jennifer was unmistakable. The same determined jaw, the same fire in the eyes. "You don't know me," he began, his gruff voice taut with urgency, "but I was a combat medic." "That dog is giving a medical alert. I've seen it before. He's not mourning. He's telling us something." Jackson stared at him, torn between agony and disbelief. "My daughter is gone," he said, voice raw. "The doctors confirmed it." Sutton barked again, louder, sharper, unwavering. His gaze never left Jackson. "I'm telling you," Jake said, steady now. "In Afghanistan, we had a retriever who alerted to micro-changes in breathing on soldiers declared dead. Dogs know. They sense what we miss." The funeral director stepped between them, voice clipped and exasperated. "Gentlemen, enough. This is neither the time nor the place." "Open the coffin," Jake said, his voice clear and deliberate, cutting through the murmurs. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Shock, confusion, outrage, even fear. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Sir, please, I understand grief can take many forms, but this—" "Listen to him," Jackson said suddenly, interrupting. His voice trembled, but his eyes were resolute. Dr. Singh's words echoed in his memory about the limits of understanding, the dangers of rushing to conclusions. "Open it," he repeated, gaze locked with Sutton's. Officer Lowry hesitated, then stepped forward, voice low and grave. "Sutton has never given a false alert. Not once. Whatever he's sensing, it's real." All eyes turned as Dr. Singh stepped quietly into view. "As the consulting neurologist on Lila's case," she said calmly, "I support examining her condition. Her final EEG showed anomalies worth re-evaluation." "This is unprecedented," the funeral director muttered, floundering. "Then call the police," Jackson said coldly, motioning to the uniformed officers in attendance. "Oh wait, they're already here." Chief Wilson stepped forward, face grim. "Given the circumstances, we have reasonable cause for an emergency medical evaluation," he said. "I'll authorize it." What followed unfolded in a dazed, surreal blur. Lowry radioed for paramedics as Jake quickly briefed Dr. Singh on his experience with combat medical alerts. She listened, without skepticism, without ego, just intent. Sutton remained atop the coffin, his posture statuesque and steady. "Nearest ambulance is 8 minutes out," Lowry reported. "We can't wait," Singh said. "Do it," Chief Wilson ordered. With practiced hands, Lowry and another officer approached the coffin. Sutton shifted just enough to give them access, never breaking contact with the lid. The latch clicked open, and the cemetery fell silent, every breath held, every eye watching as the impossible unfolded. Lila lay peacefully, arranged against white satin in her favorite blue dress embroidered with butterflies. To the untrained eye, nothing appeared amiss. which only deepened the confusion. Jake stepped forward, combat medic instincts kicking in. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, his expression sharpening as the world seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke. Seconds passed like lifetimes. Then Jake looked up, his face transformed. "She has a pulse." His calm voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "It's faint, 10, maybe 12 beats per minute. But it's there." Dr. Singh immediately moved in, checking Lila's pupils and vitals with clinical precision. "Minimal pupillary response, but present," she confirmed. "This aligns with a profound cataleptic state, not death." Jackson staggered as if struck by a wave. "She's alive?" he whispered, unable to trust his own voice. "But the hospital, the death certificate." "Catalepsy is rare, but real," Singh explained, already initiating life support protocols. Vital signs can be suppressed to levels undetectable by standard monitors. Without advanced testing, it's easy to misdiagnose. Sutton had moved beside the coffin, resuming his familiar post by Lila's side, silent, protective, resolute. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. Chief Wilson was already on his radio, coordinating a helicopter transport to Children's Memorial Hospital. The funeral had become a rescue. Mourners stepped back instinctively as paramedics rushed in. Jake remained by Lila's side, a still point in the chaos. For the first time, Jackson looked at him closely. "You're Jennifer's brother," he said, recognition dawning. Jake nodded once. "We'll talk later. Right now, your daughter needs care." As Lila was carefully transferred onto a gurney, Sutton refused to move. "He goes with her?" Jackson said. No one objected. Standing among stunned mourners, Jackson watched the ambulance pull away, its flashing lights a beacon of fragile hope. Grief had turned, impossibly, into a second chance. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his voice reverent. "In all my years," he said softly, "I've never witnessed anything like this. This was more than a medical miracle. It was a testament to the bond between a child and her protector." He looked out over the gathering. "Perhaps this should no longer be a funeral, but a prayer circle for Lila's recovery." One by one, the mourners moved, forming a circle of hope. Jake stood apart for a moment, until Chief Wilson quietly approached. "You know there's a warrant out for your arrest," Wilson said, his voice more observant than accusatory. "Parole violation from the Peterson case." Jake met his gaze without flinching. "I know, but I couldn't stay away from my niece's funeral." Wilson studied him, then slowly nodded. "Well, it seems I've misplaced my handcuffs. Strange day. And I imagine the paperwork on your arrest might take unusually long. Long enough for a judge to hear the full story." He nodded toward the retreating ambulance. "You should be with your family." As Wilson walked away, Jake remained still, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. After 15 years of prison and aimless drifting, it was a dog's unshakable loyalty that had opened the door to redemption, not just for Lila, but maybe for him too. The ambulance wound through Rivercrest's narrow streets, sirens splitting the quiet afternoon as residents turned to watch. Inside, paramedics worked furiously. "BP's dropping again," one called out. "O2 at 83%. Jackson knelt beside Lila, one hand gripping her lifeless fingers, the other resting on Sutton's head. The shepherd didn't blink, his gaze locked on Lila. Dr. Singh checked Lila's pupils again. "She's deteriorating," she said grimly. "The cataleptic state preserved some brain function, but she's been without support for almost 3 days. We need advanced care now." The radio crackled. "Emergency chopper grounded. Backup ETA, 20 minutes. Children's Memorial's pediatric team is en route," dispatch added. 35 minutes out." Dr. Singh's jaw tightened. "We can't wait. Rivercrest General is our only immediate option." Jackson's eyes darkened. "Not there. Not with Peterson. He's the one who declared her dead." "I understand, Mr. Taylor," Singh said gently, "but she won't survive the delay. They have the tools to stabilize her. We don't have a choice." The ambulance swung into the ER bay of Rivercrest General. As the doors burst open, a trauma team rushed forward. At their center stood Dr. Peterson, silver-haired, composed, unreadable. "Take her to Trauma 1, full cardiac monitoring, intubation tray, ventilator ready," he ordered. "Dr. Singh, I'll need your field notes." As Jackson stepped out with Sutton, the dog growled low, ears back, his body a shield. Before anyone could move, the rumble of a motorcycle split the air. Jake pulled in hard, helmet under one arm, eyes locked on Peterson. "I suggest you take a step back," he said, his voice ice and fire. "You've already made one catastrophic mistake with this child." Peterson barely glanced at Jake. "Security, remove this man and get that dog out of my ER." Two guards hesitated, clearly recognizing Jake. Before they could act, Chief Wilson stepped forward, flashing his badge. "Dr. Peterson," he said evenly, "under the circumstances, I'm requesting Dr. Singh continue Lila's care with guidance from Children's Memorial specialists." Peterson bristled. "This is my emergency department, Chief. Medical decisions fall to physicians, not police." "Actually," came a new voice, cool and crisp, "in cases of potential medical negligence, administrative authority can override standard protocols." All heads turned. Dr. Eleanor Winers, Chief of Medicine, stepped forward. Steel grey hair, wire-rimmed glasses. She radiated quiet authority, sharpened by decades of service. "Dr. Peterson," she said, tone flat as granite, "you will provide Dr. Singh with full support, then report to my office immediately. With respect, Dr. Winers, this is driven by emotion, not evidence." "The evidence," she replied coldly, "is in Trauma 1, alive, after you signed her death certificate. That demands a full review." She turned to Jackson. "Please wait in the family room. Dr. Singh will update you soon." As Lila disappeared behind the trauma bay doors, Jackson was ushered into a quiet waiting room. Sutton stayed at his side, finally calming now that Lila was receiving care. Jake lingered in the doorway. Jackson looked up. "You should stay," he said simply. Jake nodded and sat across from him, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Silence hung heavy between them. "Jennifer tried to find you," Jackson said at last. "After Lila was born, she wanted you to meet her." Jake's eyes stayed on the floor. "I wasn't fit to meet anyone. After my last deployment, I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing things. VA said PTSD. The meds made it worse. Jennifer didn't need that. Lila didn't either." Jackson let the truth settle. Things Jennifer had hinted at now came into focus. That incident with Peterson wasn't random, was it? Jake's jaw tightened. Number I was at the VA clinic when a woman came in with her little boy, maybe 5. He was burning up, couldn't breathe. Peterson was covering intake, turned them away over insurance, told them to try across town. I begged him to help. He had me thrown out. I snapped, followed him out, broke his nose, couple ribs. The kid ended up with permanent lung damage. Before Jackson could respond, the door opened. Dr. Singh entered, face drawn but focused. "Lila's condition is critical but stable," she said. "We've started life support and corrected some of the metabolic imbalances. The transport team from Children's Memorial will arrive in 15 minutes. Jackson leaned forward. "Will she recover?" Dr. Singh hesitated, then spoke gently. "The cataleptic state preserved brain function, but oxygen deprivation has caused damage. We won't know the full extent until neuroimaging and testing at Memorial, but you should prepare for the possibility of severe impairment." Jackson blinked hard, the words like a physical blow. "What kind of impairment?" "She may retain basic functions, but speech, memory, mobility, cognition, all may be affected. She might require full-time care." Sutton whined softly, leaning into Jackson's leg. "There are also legal implications," Singh continued. "The death certificate, the funeral. This represents a significant failure in medical protocol." "Negligence?" Jake asked quietly. "Or worse?" Singh didn't answer directly. "There will be a full investigation, but right now Lila is our priority." Just then, a nurse stepped in. "Pediatric transport is here, prepping for immediate transfer." The room sprang into motion, equipment readied, forms signed, Lila carefully stabilized. When they approached the helicopter, a nurse turned to Jackson. "I'm sorry, no animals allowed on board, not even service dogs. Flight regulations." Jackson knelt beside Sutton. "He's a trained canine, medical alert certified. He saved her life." "I believe you," the nurse said sincerely. "But it's a weight balance issue. No exceptions." Chief Wilson stepped in. "I'll arrange a police escort. You and the dog will follow right behind." As the gurney began to roll toward the helipad, Sutton tensed. His body went rigid, tail stiff. Then he let out a sharp, urgent whine, the precise pattern of his medical alert. "Wait!" Jackson shouted. "Sutton's signaling. Something's wrong." Dr. Singh rushed to the gurney, her usual composure replaced by urgency. "Her oxygen's dropping. We need to adjust the ventilator now." The pediatric transport team sprang into action. adjusting equipment and administering medication through Lila's IV. Sutton stood sentinel, his posture tense but disciplined. Only when the monitors began to stabilize did he ease back, his body visibly relaxing. "Your dog just prevented a crisis," the Children's Memorial physician said to Jackson, his tone full of genuine respect. "That's recoltonable." As they resumed moving Lila toward the waiting helicopter, the weight of it all settled on Jackson. His daughter had been declared dead, prepared for burial, and even now, if she survived, she might never return to the little girl she had been. The miracle had become a nightmare of irreversible consequences. Jake stepped beside him, placing a hand on Jackson's shoulder. No words, just the quiet solidarity of shared sorrow and a long, uncertain road ahead. Children's Memorial Hospital, Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. 3 days later, the PICU at Children's Memorial ran with quiet, purposeful intensity. Machines hummed, nurses moved swiftly, and the tension of hope and heartbreak hung in the air like static. Jackson hadn't left Lila's side. He slept in the recliner beside her bed, and only ate when nurses insisted. Sutton, thanks to a rare exemption, remained in the room as well, granted full access after repeatedly detecting subtle shifts in Lila's condition before machines could register them. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, director of pediatric neurology and the very specialist they had tried to reach before Lila's collapse, had taken personal charge of the case. In her early 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind designer glasses, she radiated both intelligence and compassion. "Mr. Taylor," she said gently, settling into a chair next to him, "I'd like to go over Lila's full neurological assessment." Jackson straightened. Jake lingered silently in the doorway at Jackson's request. "We've completed extensive testing," Montgomery continued, flipping open a thick file. EEG, functional response evaluations, and neuroimaging. "What we're seeing is highly unusual." Jackson braced himself for the worst. She entered a rare cataleptic state. Given her epilepsy history, I believe it was not simply the result of seizure activity, but something more complex, a neuroprotective shutdown mechanism, possibly genetic in origin. She turned the page. Some brain regions show expected damage from oxygen deprivation, but others, notably those linked to consciousness, sensory input, and emotional processing, are recoltonably intact. Jackson leaned forward, hope blooming in cautious increments. "What does that mean for her recovery?" Montgomery didn't sugarcoat. "It means her prognosis is better than we feared. She's showing early signs of awareness, mild responses to your voice, and notably strong reactions to Sutton. She's not conscious in the traditional sense, but these are meaningful neurological responses. So, she might wake up, be Lila again. She may. The brain is resilient, especially at her age. There will be challenges, motor control, speech, cognition, but with intensive rehabilitation, a meaningful recovery is possible." For the first time in days, Jackson exhaled without despair. As Montgomery outlined therapy options, Jake shifted uneasily. Through the hallway window, he noticed a man in a tailored suit speaking with a hospital administrator. The man clutched a leather portfolio like a shield, occasionally glancing toward Lila's room. Jake's instincts sharpened. "Doctor, that guy in the hall, he seems too interested. Is there a security issue?" Montgomery looked. Her expression cooled. "That's Gerald Whitman, Hospital Legal Counsel." She turned back to Jackson. "Riverist General has contacted us. They're requesting access to Lila's diagnostic results and treatment logs." Jackson's brief hope curdled into cold fury. "They're trying to protect themselves, cover Peterson's mistake." "They're within their rights to request information," Montgomery said evenly. "But you, as her father, control what's released. Legally and ethically." Before Jackson could respond, his phone buzzed, a local number he didn't recognize. He stepped into the hallway, brushing past Whitman with a glance. "Mr. Taylor? Amanda Reeves, Riverist Chronicle," came a brisk voice. "We've received a tip regarding possible medical negligence at Riverist General. Would you be willing to comment?" "How did you get this number?" Jackson snapped, shock morphing into anger. "And how do you know anything about my daughter?" "We have sources within the hospital system," the woman replied. "Professional, but not unkind. This story's going to break, with or without your input. Dr. Peterson has been involved in similar controversies before. Our research suggests a pattern, particularly in cases involving complex diagnoses or insurance limitations. Jackson hung up without another word. Back inside Lila's room, Jake and Dr. Montgomery were in quiet conversation. "The hospital lawyer wants a word with you," Jake said. "I told him to schedule something properly. Lurking in hallways doesn't count." Montgomery closed Lila's chart with slow, deliberate care. "Mr. Taylor, you should know multiple media outlets have contacted us. We can't release anything without your permission, but it's clear the story's gaining traction." "It already has," Jackson said, relaying the reporter's call. Jake frowned. "Someone's leaking, and not just about Lila, someone who knows Peterson's past, someone who wants it all exposed." A hospital administrator appeared at the door. "Dr. Montgomery, urgent meeting in conference room B. Riverist's legal team is pressing for immediate discussion." Montgomery stood reluctantly. "Please restrict visitors to family only for now. The nursing staff has orders to keep unauthorized individuals, including journalists, away." As she left, Jackson sank back into the chair by Lila's bedside. Sutton approached, resting his head gently on Jackson's knee. "This is turning into a circus," Jackson murmured to Jake. "Lila needs calm, not headlines." Jake hesitated. "There's something you need to know about Peterson, and why this is escalating." He closed the door before continuing. "After I was arrested for assaulting Peterson, a nurse named Caroline Mills contacted my public defender. She wanted to testify. Said Peterson had a history, substandard care, especially with patients who had complicated conditions or poor insurance. She had reports, documentation." Jackson sat upright. "What happened?" "She backed out. 2 days before the hearing, she accepted a job in Oregon. My lawyer tried to subpoena her, but then the court date got pushed up. It all happened fast, too fast. I always believed Peterson, or someone in admin, pressured her out. And now? Maybe someone found her old files, or maybe Peterson's made more mistakes since. Either way, Lila's case, it's a spark. It could blow everything open." A soft knock interrupted them. A young nurse entered, glancing at Lila's monitor. "Doctor, Montgomery's still in the meeting," she said. "Also, there's a police officer in the waiting room asking to speak with Mr. Morgan. He says it's about a parole violation." Jake's body tensed, but his face stayed calm. "I've been expecting that. Since the funeral." Before anyone could speak, Sutton suddenly lifted his head, his body stilled, gaze locked on Lila. He moved to the edge of the bed and let out a soft, familiar whine, the same warning signal he'd given before Lila's earlier seizures. "Get Dr. Montgomery," Jackson said sharply. "Sutton's alerting. Something's happening." The nurse turned to leave, but then froze. A sound, faint, human. A moan. Jackson spun around. Lila's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched against the hospital sheets. Slowly, painfully, her eyes opened, glassy at first, then slowly focusing on his face. Recognition flickered, dim but unmistakable. "Lila," Jackson whispered, barely breathing. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her lips moved. No sound came, but the shape of the word was clear. "Sutton!" The room exploded into motion. The nurse called for the attending team. Sutton paced in a tight loop, tail thumping, whining with urgent relief. Jake stepped back, forgotten legal trouble already dissolving into irrelevance. Dr. Montgomery burst into the room, her coat half off, as she moved straight to Lila's side, launching into a rapid neurological exam. Her voice was focused, steady, hands firm and practiced through each test. When she finally stepped back, her carefully guarded expression broke. Wonder cracked through her clinical detachment. "This is recoltonable," Dr. Montgomery said, her eyes on Lila but her voice directed to Jackson. "She's responding purposefully. There's recognition, emotional orientation." Jackson gripped Lila's hand tighter, tears brimming. "But why now?" he asked softly. "What changed?" Montgomery glanced at Sutton, sitting still and focused beside the bed, his gaze locked on Lila. "I can't explain it medically," she admitted. "Neurological recovery is complex, especially in cases as rare as this, but I've stopped discounting the unmeasurable. Emotional connection, familiarity, they matter more than we want to admit." Out in the hallway, Jake faced the officer who had come for him. Officer Miller stood waiting, young but resolute. "Chief Wilson sent me," he said quietly. "Judge Gardner reviewed your case. Given what happened at the funeral, she's issued a temporary stay on your parole violation, pending full review." Jake's face remained neutral, but his shoulders finally relaxed. What evidence? Multiple video sources, hospital surveillance, and civilian footage all confirm your actions were medically necessary and that you saved a life. Jake gave a single nod of understanding. When Miller left, he returned to a room transformed. Lila was still weak, her body unmoving, but her eyes tracking slowly. They followed Jackson, then shifted to Sutton. Her lips moved again, soundless but unmistakable. "Good boy," Jackson broke, shoulders shaking. He leaned in close, voice trembling. "He knew, baby. He knew before any of us did." The moment echoed outward, soft but seismic. Around them, nurses moved into action, doctors consulted charts, and hospital lawyers debated policy behind closed doors. Reporters gathered downstairs, chasing rumors of a child returned from the brink. But none of it touched the quiet miracle unfolding in that room. 6 months later, the seasons had turned in Riverest. Spring yielded to summer, and now autumn wrapped the Appalachian foothills in gold, rust, and fire. Lila sat bundled on the back deck, a blanket draped over her legs. Her wheelchair faced the morning sun, her expression calm but determined. Each word of her speech therapy exercises came slowly, deliberately. "Und Sutton saved me," she said, shaping each syllable with care. "He knew I was still here." Sutton, sprawled beside her in his service vest, raised his head at the sound of his name, ever watchful, ever steady. Inside the kitchen, Jackson sat at the table with Jake and Sarah Williams from the animal sanctuary. A neat stack of legal documents lay between them. "The settlement covers all of Lila's medical care," Jackson said, voice steady. "Past, present, and future. And Riverest generals agreed to overhaul their protocols. For good." Sarah nodded. "And once our 501c3 status clears, Lila's Angels can officially launch. We've got 3 hospitals ready to partner for medical alert dog training." The idea had come to Jackson during those sleepless nights in the ICU, a way to honor the bond that saved his daughter and ensure other families had access to the same hope. Jake looked toward the window, watching Lila and Sutton beneath the autumn sky. "She's stronger than any of us," he said simply. Jackson smiled. "Yeah. But she didn't do it alone. The Lila's Angels Foundation had found its purpose. Born from one family's ordeal and one dog's devotion, the non-profit would train rescue dogs as medical alert companions for children with neurological conditions. It would also serve as an educational platform for integrating service animals into pediatric care. The settlement had seeded the effort. Pharmaceutical companies, inspired by Lila's story, pledged continuing support. Momentum was building. Sarah flipped through construction plans. "The training facility renovations are ahead of schedule. If all goes smoothly, the first families and dogs will begin the pilot program in February." Jake nodded, now officially the Foundation's operations director. Months of legal limbo had cleared. His parole violation was dismissed. His past had given way to something larger. "Chief Wilson called this morning," Jake said, scanning his tablet. "They've approved Sutton's reduced duty, 20 hours a month for community outreach. That keeps him available for our training demos." Just then, the back door opened. Lila rolled inside, Melissa gently pushing the wheelchair. Sutton followed, calm and alert. "She did great today," Melissa said. "Speech clarity is improving, and her sentence structure's becoming more complex. The neuroplasticity we're seeing, it's exactly what Dr. Montgomery predicted." Once Melissa departed, the family gathered in the living room, a space that now quietly bore the Coltons of their journey. Medical equipment blended seamlessly with homely warmth. Therapy schedules were pinned beside Lila's watercolor paintings. Sutton's gear was neatly tucked into a custom cabinet. His vest hung like a symbol of quiet heroism. "I have something for you," Jackson said, rising and walking to his desk. He returned with a small velvet box. It arrived this morning. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, but her grip was steadier now. Her progress, after months of therapy, visible in every movement. Inside was a silver medallion on a soft blue ribbon. The inscription read, "Sutton, Extraordinary Service Beyond Duty." Jackson smiled. "The governor will present the official one next month, but they sent this replica for you." She always, Lila gazed at the medal, then at Sutton, lying faithfully at her feet. "He deserves it," she said softly. "He didn't give up." And neither had she. No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. The truth had already been lived. Their story of survival, connection, and trust was not something that science alone could explain. It was something deeper, older, almost spiritual. A girl fighting for life, a dog refusing to leave her side, and a bond that became a bridge between despair and healing. That evening, after Lila had been settled in bed with Sutton curled beside her, Jackson and Jake sat on the back deck under a sky flecked with stars. "Jennifer would be proud," Jackson said at last, breaking the silence. "Of you, of all of this, of what we built, for Lila and for others." Jake didn't answer immediately. Emotions still came to him slowly, tentatively, like sunlight breaking through old clouds. "She always believed in people," he said quietly. "Even in me, especially when I didn't." Jackson nodded. "Lila's like that. She sees the value in the overlooked, the broken." Jake glanced at him, then out toward the night. "So do you." In that moment, there was no need to say more. They had both changed. Jackson, the grieving father who found purpose beyond pain. Jake, the outcast who became a cornerstone. Together, they had built not just a foundation, but a family. The next morning, Rivercrest awoke to its first snowfall of the season. A hush lay over the world, soft, pristine, full of promise. Lila insisted on going outside, bundled in layers, her cheeks pink with excitement. From her wheelchair, she directed Sutton through the fresh snow. "Look, Daddy!" she called out, her voice stronger now, brimming with wonder. "He's making a heart!" Jackson looked and saw it. Sutton, bounding in playful arcs, had traced a perfect heart in the snow, encircling Lila in a symbol of love so unmistakable it caught in his throat. Whether by instinct or accident didn't matter. The meaning was clear. As Sutton returned to her side, pressing gently against her wheelchair, Jackson raised his camera and captured the moment. That photo of a girl once declared lost, and the dog who had refused to believe it, would become the face of the Lila's Angels Foundation. A beacon for families who needed hope. A testament to what love, pure, unwavering, can do. The story didn't end in Rivercrest. It traveled, first through hospitals, then across media outlets, and eventually around the globe. Other families began training dogs through the foundation. Other children found strength in the silent presence of an animal who could sense what no one else could. But the greatest truth wasn't in the miracle of Lila's recovery, nor in the court battles, or even the foundation's success. It was something Sutton had known from the very beginning. Sometimes the faintest heartbeat is still strong enough to hold on to the greatest love. In a world obsessed with measurements and data, Lila's journey reminded us that some truths live beyond the scope of machines and metrics. They live in instinct, in faith, in a dog refusing to leave a child's side, in a father refusing to stop believing, in the quiet, steady courage of a girl who decided to come back. And above all, it teaches us this: never underestimate the power of loyalty. Never walk away from those who still have fight in them. And never forget, miracles often arrive in the shape of second chances, sometimes with 4 paws and a heart full of love. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire hope, healing, and the extraordinary bonds that connect us. Leave a comment below. Let us know what part of Lila and Sutton's story stayed with you. We'll see you in the next one.